am your African history teacher, Professor Hicks. Please excuse me. Honey, I'm broadcasting. All right, I had to give a quick shout to the wife. She's out shopping, I think, somewhere. Okay. Thank you for being patient. So, yes, we're back here for a new series. We finished with the Stono Rebellion and its contextual, or its context of the American Revolution and ultimately the signing of the Declaration of Independence, okay? So this series of broadcasts are dealing with the same thing. We are still dealing with the American Revolution as it relates to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Why are we doing this? Because we know on July 4th of 2026, this country will be celebrating its 250 years of union based on the signing of the Declaration of Independence. As such, celebrations, events, parties, and so on will be taking place from from probably January 1st on concerning this. Well, what's the problem? Well, as I've mentioned on several occasions, we have a PBS series documentary on the American Revolution produced by documentarian Ken Burns. But we know when Europeans tell our story, it's never the full story, or it's never the most important things about our story, and we're always left behind. So Professor Hicks has taken upon himself, as we go into the celebration of this historical event, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, that we give the African side of the story as well. So the Stono Rebellion was part of that. And I'm not going to go back into that because we've done that already. In 2 weeks, it's time to move on. Hopefully that you were paying attention and involved in watching it so that you would benefit from it as well. But now we must move on to another portion of this discussion. So now that we've talked about the rebellions, we need to know what was the affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, affect, emotional, psychological effect of these rebellions and of slavery. So our new topic is as such, white supremacy, slavery, and the legacy of trauma. White supremacy, slavery, and the legacy of trauma. Yes, we need to talk about this. Slave rebellions have been taking place when the first slave was captured, kidnapped, and eventually enslaved. We have always rebelled and resisted. It is in our DNA as well as our cosmology and our African traditions. Resistance was traditionally, psychologically, and spiritually embedded in African culture from its inception. Why? Why would this be incorporated in African culture? Well, the main reason why is because African cosmology, our cosmology, for those who don't understand cosmology, let's just put spirituality. But African cosmology incorporates such things as chaos and order. As above, so below. And finally, our cosmology deals with the doctrine of opposites. And through these concepts, African people sought a balance or a homeostasis in life. Slavery was definitely a form of chaos. And as such, Africans resisted, and African resistance was the means to bring some form of order through the emancipation and ultimately to African liberation. African slavery was a monumental historic experience and event, and like most monumental events, it left its legacy and the map of human history. There is nowhere in the world where you can go and not find some information or some discussion on African slavery. African slavery, I'm sorry, the legacy of African enslavement in America particularly is one of brutal oppression, the Holocaust of over 100 million lives lost, and the psychopathology, get familiar with that term, of the slave and the slave master. One more time for that. It's really important. The psychopathology of the slave and the slave master. In this series of broadcasts, we will examine how slavery and its attendant psychopathology manifests itself in the colonial period and present. So we want to take this psychopathology, look at it then, how it affected then, and how has it manifested itself in the behaviors, the psychology, the attitudes of people today, particularly white and black people. So what are some of the topics we're going to lay on to bring this discussion to some good fruition? Well, we're going to talk about PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, as developed, produced, and brought about by Dr. Joy DeGruy. Now, if you guys are not familiar with her, you should. She's produced a book, along with thousands of speeches, on the post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay? This book is relatively cheap. You should purchase it. This is the book by which I will be working from. So topics for discussion one more time would be PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, and I will define all these terms for you, including psychopathology and everything. We'll have that down. Probably we'll get a slideshow that you can look and come back to later for these terms. Hopefully I will have the time to do that. We also would talk about trauma. What's the trauma that was incurred by the Africans and by the slave master that we see then and also can see today? We're then going to talk about genetic survival, the survival of the white race as it relates to the productivity, the genetic productivity of the black race. We're going to talk about epigenetics. Yes, cell expression. Epigenetics is a form of cell expression. And this cell expression, as we will learn, leaves a legacy on us today. So for questions, we have to think that we always look at slavery and how it affected slaves. But during this series of broadcasts, we're going to talk about how slavery not only affected the slave, but how did it affect the slave master? This is something that rarely is discussed, but you will hear it discussed on Professor Hicks' channel Connection. So please make sure you like and subscribe, okay? Because it's going to be a very interesting topic. We'll begin this topic tomorrow. I don't know if I mentioned that. Let me move on. So we always look at slavery from the aspect of the slave. How about the slave master? What was the effect of this legacy of slavery on the slave master? You know, you can't give away a disease unless you have it. What pathology, what sickness, what pathology was manifested in the slave and slave master? What names can we put on that we would recognize today? How does white supremacy then and now, how does white supremacy continue and racism, white supremacy and racism continue to endure in white people today as it did yesterday in colonial times? How does this happen? We're going to talk about that. and we're going to talk about many, many more things. So I'm not going to keep you long today. I've been putting out videos. Please watch the previous video that I put out, which was yesterday. So this will give you some grounding as to where we're going, because we're moving from rebellions. But you must understand how important rebellions are to psychological thinking and to manifestations of behavior. And we're taking the rebellions and putting them in context of the American Revolution, ultimately signing the Declaration of Independence, and how that shaped America. Because it truly did. Rebellions shaped America very, very seriously. That affected everybody. And one example of that would be the laws that we have today. But we want to know not only that, how it affected the slaves, but we want to know, again, how it affected the slave master. Okay, so I'm going to leave you for the rest of the day, and I will see you again tomorrow. We'll begin our broadcast on this topic, and I'm not sure how long it will go. I'm going to check I got to check my notes and books and see how long we will do it, but I'm sure we're going to have at least 2 or 3 days of this psychological impact of slavery on both slave and slave master, white supremacy, how it endures today based on yesterday. All right. So, again,